Okay, so the next speaker is Stephen Harkin from Delta Energy and Environment. Stephen is not for the first time guest on our event, our talks about gas, or gas day as it was called before. So they carried out another study for us. Stephen is head of consultancy at Delta Energy and Environment. Please, Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chris. And as Chris said, I've been to, I think this is my third Gas Day or TAG event. I've worked with GasBE for a few years, and my French and Dutch is still pretty terrible. So this will be in English. If you have any questions, please ask in English. Today, I'll be presenting some results from a study we've carried out for GasBE, looking at how gas demand can evolve in the industrial sector in Belgium to 2050. And yeah, just in terms of the presentation itself, I'll give a brief introduction of the scope of that project that we've carried out. I'll give a brief look just at industrial demand today. High-level consideration of the key drivers that we consider within this study and the methodology that we used to forecast gas demand. And then I'll finish with some of the results, looking at the industrial sector overall and at the sector level with a particular focus on chemicals as one example. Very briefly, who's Delta? We're a research and consulting company based in Scotland, in the UK, with offices in France, Netherlands, and Denmark. And we focus on really understanding the demand side, or the customer end of the energy value chain. And we help our clients understand the energy transition, so moving from old to new energy, and help them with their strategies, with their customer propositions and business models. We organize our research around these key areas, so EVs and electricity. Heat is one of our longest standing core areas, and it's our expertise and knowledge within heat that we've applied to this study for GasBE. And we help our clients by subscription-based research services and consultancy. But in terms of the project I'm going to talk about today, so this project, we focused on how annual and peak gas demand will change out to 2050, looking at certain points along that journey. And all of the analysis we've carried out at a regional level, so considering the 3 different regions in Belgium. A few years ago, this started out on a study just looking at the residential sector and how gas demand in the residential sector will evolve, which has since been updated. Last year, we completed the picture by looking at the commercial and industrial sectors and how gas demand will evolve within those. But today, I'm just focusing on the gas demand analysis we've done on the industrial sector. In terms of gas demand today, or energy demand in the industrial sector, in Belgium, industry accounts for around 1/3 of final energy consumption, so a very big energy consuming part of the picture in Belgium. And breaking that down by the key sectors. So this pie chart just breaks down the final energy consumption by industrial sector on the right-hand side. Some big sectors, chemicals, iron and steel. But within this study, I'll be focused on 7 industrial sectors there at the bottom, which accounts for over 80% of the final energy consumption. So we didn't have time to cover everything, but we covered a large chunk of industrial energy demand within this study. And in terms of how we looked at these sectors, so we started by breaking down that demand into the end uses. And we focused on the heat end uses. So the high temperature, low temperature heat end uses, drying and space heating. So covering around 70% of that industrial consumption. And we've also broken down this final energy consumption by fuel type. So within this study, we've considered at a sector level and at an end use level how the fuel mix and technology mix will evolve out to 2050, pulling out what this all means for gas demand going forward. And the technologies we've considered primarily for this are on the right-hand side there. So looking at gas boilers, CHP, furnaces of various fuel types, heat pumps. So we've considered how the deployment of those technologies will change based on the industrial sector and based on the end use. And again, as I said, we've built this up from a regional level. So just breaking industrial demand down today at the regional level, it's primarily in Flanders, a significant chunk in Wallonia, a little bit of industry in Brussels. Briefly on the key drivers that we've considered. So there's a lot of drivers that we factored into this study. Some more important or more impactful than others. But some of the key impact, or some of the drivers that had the biggest impact were energy prices, which had a really strong influence on the technology deployment or technology choices going forward. The economic outlook within Belgium and globally, and also the competition from foreign markets. So that had quite a significant impact on our expectation of growth in the different industrial sectors. And policy, both at the EU level, but also kind of voluntary energy policy at the regional level within Belgium, had quite significant impacts for energy efficiency improvements going forward, and also technology deployment. When it came to the forecast, we started by just breaking down the gas demand today, as we did on the previous slides, and we considered 3 key metrics to help build the picture. So we considered at the sector level how the production output will change going forward. So will the sectors stay the same size? Will they grow? Will they shrink? We considered the energy intensity going forward. So industry in Belgium has already invested a lot and improved energy intensity up to this point. But we considered what's the scope for further energy efficiency improvements going forward. And finally, we looked at the technology mix. So will we see switches away from gas to electric? Will we see switches from coal and oil to gas or other technology? So we tried to consider that as well to build this picture of gas demand going forward. So on to some of the results. This is kind of the headline result. So this is overall, across all sectors, how we think gas demand in the industrial sector in Belgium for heating will change out to 2050. So starting today at around 45 to 50 terawatt hours of gas. And the headline is, we expect very little change in gas demand to 2030. So we have a little bit of technology change, a little bit of energy efficiency improvements, but that's pretty much offset by growth in some of the key sectors, in particular the chemicals sector and the food and drinks sectors. Beyond 2030, we see a bit more technology change. So some shifting to gas, away from coal and oil, but also shifting away from gas to more efficient gas options, and also to electric and biomass. But the overall impact of that is that we expect around a 12 or 13% reduction in gas demand across the industrial sector for heat production. So not a huge reduction, but I think that highlights the challenge that the industrial sector has, where a lot of the heat is needed for high temperature processes in order to remain competitive. There's a lot of infrastructure that needs to continue to be used, but I think it's a big challenge for the industrial sector in Belgium to shift away from gas. So certainly a big role for green gases and potentially hydrogen going forward to help decarbonize that gas that is being used. Looking briefly at one sector in particular, chemical sector. So this was one of the, well, it's the biggest sector today, accounting for around 5% of gross value add in Belgium, so I thought an important sector to look at. As I said, we considered the production output, the energy intensity, and the technology mix for each of the sectors out to 2050. Briefly in the chemicals, it's a sector where we expect to still see significant growth in terms of the production to 2050. It's a big export market, a very well recognized and respected sector internationally, so we expect the export market to drive quite a lot of growth in the chemical sector in Belgium going forward. In terms of energy intensity, already quite a lot of improvements made in the sector, but we expect to see more improvements going forward. The chemical sector is ambitious and willing to invest quite a lot from the research we've done in terms of trying to improve its energy efficiency, and certainly being one of the biggest sectors today and also one of the sectors likely to grow a lot. I think the energy intensity improvements will be really important for this particular sector. And briefly on technology usage, so for chemicals in particular, this study suggests that we won't see too much electrification within this sector. We'll see some switch to heat pumps. Where we expect to see significant change is from heat produced from gas boilers today shifting to CHP. That'll be both biomass and gas-fired CHP. The chemical sector is one sector where there's a lot of heat and electricity demand, so CHP is quite a good fit for that. But this chart still illustrates the sort of the blend or mix of technologies that we expect to see within this sector out to 2050. Bringing that together, we're expecting to see overall a 9% reduction, so slightly less than the average across industry within the chemical sector in terms of its gas demand for heat production out to 2050. And that's largely, or that's smaller reduction compared to the averages because this is a sector where we expect to see the biggest growth in terms of production output to 2050. So that coupled with energy efficiency improvements and some switching of technology results in a 9% reduction. We expect to see a slightly bigger drop away from gas in Wallonia versus Flanders, but only minor changes, and that's largely due to slightly different policy ambitions across the regions. So that was one sector. As I said, we considered a lot of different sectors in this study. This chart is comparing the production output, or effectively the size of these sectors going forward. Along with chemicals, food and drink is the other sector where we expect to see significant growth in that sector out to 2050. It's a key sector. It will grow as the population grows. It's got a big export market, which we expect to continue to grow as well. The other sectors you can see kind of hover around same level as today, small growth or small reduction. In terms of where we think there might be a bit of a contraction in the sectors, it's the paper and pulp and the metal processing sectors. Metal processing includes car manufacturing. We expect a bit more international competition, which might impact the size of that sector going forward. And paper and pulp is a sector where we expect demand to fall, and certainly for increased competition from markets where energy prices are lower than that in Belgium. So a bit of variation in terms of the growth across the sectors we've considered. Energy intensity, as well as so this is chemicals at the bottom, which it's a sector we expect to see the biggest further improvement. But for all of the sectors, we do expect also to see improvement going forward. As I said, a lot of the improvements in energy efficiency have already been achieved by today. So it'll be sort of small incremental improvements out to 2050. And then finally on the technology mix, so this is, 100% means that's the share of kind of gas today. Where this chart goes above 100%, we expect to see the share of heat produced from gas increasing. Where the chart goes below 100%, we expect the share of heat produced by gas to decrease. I'll just focus on one or 2 points. So iron and steel is one sector where we expect the share of gas to grow quite a lot out to 2050. And that's primarily driven by coal furnaces in Flanders switching to gas and electric. And also oil furnaces in Wallonia shifting also to gas and electric. So this is a bit of fuel switching away from coal or oil to gas in the future. And paper and pulp and minerals, here we see a bit of a kink in the short term. So here we expect to see a bit more deployment of CHP in the short term, and again shifting away from coal and oil to gas in the near term. Out to 2050, we expect some of that to shift away to electric technologies and biomass. But you can see even by 2050, we still expect around gas, heat being produced by gas today in some of these sectors might only fall down to 80%, so only a small reduction compared to the current picture. So this is the same chart I showed earlier where it's the 12 or 13% reduction in gas demand overall, just broken down by the sector level. So you can see there's some sectors, metal, paper and pulp and minerals, where we'd expect to see the biggest reduction in gas demand. But that reduction's only 20 to 30% out to 2050. Some sectors will stay fairly stable, and I think there's one sector, food and drink in particular, where we think gas demand will actually increase compared to today. So I think from the analysis we've done when we looked at the residential, commercial and industrial sectors, residential and commercial sector, a lot more opportunity and a lot easier to shift away from gas. Industrial sector, because of in some cases, the high temperature, high quality heat that's required, it's quite difficult to shift away from gas. So I think there'll be a big challenge if this remains natural gas, carbon targets will be quite a long way off. So I think quite a big, important role for green gases and potentially hydrogen to really try and target and help decarbonize this sector. So in summary, industry is a really key sector, key part of the Belgium economy. And we're expecting changes in production output to be quite a big influencer and impact on gas demand going forward for Belgium. In terms of energy efficiency, we expect to see some smaller gains and improvements going forward. A lot of the low-hanging fruit has already been tackled and a lot of improvements have already been made. But in terms of the technology mix, we still expect to see gas having quite a strong role and a big role out to 2050. So what does that mean? We will expect to see some electrification, perhaps for the space heating or the lower temperature heat processes, displacing some of that gas. But certainly a big challenge and big opportunity for green gas, hydrogen to really target this sector and to help decarbonize the industrial sector out to 2050. So that's some of the key highlights from that study. It's with GasBE, and I think, Chris, you're willing to share extracts from this study. So happy to take any questions on what I've presented, and happy to discuss afterwards if you've got any particular comments or reaction to what I've shown. Thank you.